That's milk. Yes.
I'll drink soon. No, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just going to turn my camera off while I eat, and then I will turn it back on.
That's right.
But I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for letting me in.
See Alex. Hello, Alex. How you doing?
Hi, good evening.
Yeah, we can hear you all right. And Darren and somebody new, Jock, who you've got on your screen anyway.
Hello there. Good evening.
Hi. How you doing?
Nice to see you all.
Yeah. Yes, I don't think we've met, have we?
No, we haven't. No. I was giving you name and number to say you come along and join. I'm just getting back involved with teaching some ground school, so I thought this would all be beneficial to get stuck in and find out what it's all about with regard to helicopters. I'm more of a fixed wing chap, but keen to learn all about the helicopters.
Oh, okay. So are you a fixed wing instructor, are you?
Well, I have been for many years, yeah. And I was
okay.
a commercial pilot for probably close to 30 years, I suppose, but I don't fly anymore.
Oh, so you don't fly anymore, did you say?
A medical retirement, but I have the ground in hand where possible.
Got it. Okay, no worries. But you're still teaching, which is nice, on the ground instead, though.
Sorry, I lost you.
So you're a little bit frozen, the Mojock. That's no worries. And Manj, hey, you there, Manj?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, all here, Paul. Thank
So,
you. Happy
all
New Year.
good.
We haven't seen you for ages, Manj.
I'll be back in, Paul. I've got a few projects I've finished now, so I'll be seeing you hopefully from next week onwards.
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
Cool. That's all right. Well, a quick bit of chit chat whilst anybody else. I'll just check in case anybody else is trying to join. Bear with me 1 second. Let's have a quick look. Can't see anybody else for a minute. Sometimes people email me the last second. Nope, there's nothing on there for now. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. And I'll do the usual kind of just to set the scene. You know, I'm obviously not going to try and teach you principles of flight in the space of whatever time we've got tonight. It's just not possible,
Please
is
do.
it? Yeah, yeah.
Please do.
I'll try it. Yeah. So we're trying to accommodate from people that are beginning to learn to fly right the way through to fixed wing pilots there, by Jock, and students that are learning. You know what it's like. We've got to try and accommodate everybody, haven't we? So we're going to go from making hopefully it nice, plain and simple to maybe the more complex part of it. Yeah, that's the idea of it. So you know, so I don't have to do all the talking. Few questions sometimes of other people. So what is principle flight all about? I'm looking at them in here, they're all gone quiet.
No.
Because
How the helicopter gets in the air.
that's right. I mean, it is kind of as the name suggests, isn't it? It's the principles behind how it manages to fly. So when we talk about the exam side of things, there's another one that's sort of vaguely similar, which is aircraft general knowledge. But that, of course, is more about how the helicopter's made, isn't it? Just different systems, different rotor designs, those sorts of things, not necessarily how it actually manages to fly. So just making sure that's nice and clear. But those two topics, we normally get people to study together because they go hand in hand. And then later on, when you're looking at the series of exams, operational procedures, you'll sort of swear blind. There's definitely some questions in there that sound A, technical about the helicopter, and B, principles of flighty. So that's why we often leave that exam quite near the end. I mean, if you've done your one yet. Oh, yeah, of course you have. Your ops, operational procedures, yeah. Because that's a real mishmash of everything, isn't it?
Yeah,
for Kyle at the moment.
Yeah.
Anyway, principles of flight. So yeah, how these things manage to fly. So we quite often start off just simply with how a wing flies. Why would I be talking about a wing?
Basically, the rotor blades are wings.
Yeah. Or
Small
we could do it the other way around and
Small
sort of wing rotor blades that don't spin round. Sorry, I'll yeah, so this is it, isn't this why we call them rotary wing? Because really our blades are wings that are spinning round, and that generates that forward movement, but just in a circular motion. So how does an aerofoil generate lift? Does it generate lift?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, a surface area flows over the top of the wing faster, creating a low pressure on the top of the wing, and underneath it goes slower, and high pressure will always go to low, giving it the element of lift. That's one of them, one principle.
That's one of the principles, isn't it? We can either see it sometimes, either it's pushing it up or it's sucking it up.
Yeah.
We round, yeah, that's right. However, is it how a rotor blade does it?
No, Newton's third law, is it? A reaction force equal or opposite reaction
Well,
force. That has a bit of an impact.
There is some of that. So how does I'm looking at Tony at the moment.
See, something to do
Is
with the
that-
angle of the attack and the relative wind.
Is that true though, Tony? So helicopter rotor blades, is that how they generate lift? Does a rotor blade on a helicopter generate lift?
Only at a certain angle, depending on.
Is it the whole thing? Is it the whole sort of together?
Potentially, yeah. There's something I'm sort of teasing something out of you to sort of provoke a bit of thought at the moment. So, like Jock said, if you just take a straightforward, non-symmetrical aerofoil section, like the wing of a PA-28 that's parked out there, there's a definite curve to the top, isn't it? And the bottom's fairly flat. The airflow has to travel further over the top, so it travels faster, creates less pressure. Hey presto, got higher pressure underneath and lower pressure, and the wing goes upwards. But I'm just asking, and I'm looking at Tony in particular, Ross, yeah, Kyle, not so much Grant, Malcolm potentially as well, Sue. So and online, who could I sort of pick on here?
Look at me.
I'll just pick on him here for a minute.
Well, if
Why have I left Grant out of this? There's something about Capri. The Ford Capri. Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah, can I just say yes? Because I want to go for yes. It's
right.
the same. It's essentially the same in my mind because basically what you're doing is you're pushing a fixed wing against the wind, and you're driving a rotary wing in the same way, but against the wind.
But I slipped in a quick word when I was just explaining something. I know nobody. Symmetrical. So the Robinson rotor blades, the top is the same as the bottom. So if you've got zero pitch on that blade spinning round, how much lift does it generate?
Well, the angle same as the
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, down the blade there is a bit of twist, and it's about 8-degree twist. So the root of the blade is angled up slightly, so it does start to generate a tiny bit of lift, sort of thing. But as far as an aerofoil section, a Robinson rotor blade, literally, if you keep it flat, i.e., zero pitch, spin it round, no lift whatsoever. And we feel this because when we, as instructors, when we get out underneath, I've just been sending Kyle solo today in the R22. I can stand under that rotor disc with him sitting in there at full RPM, and there's literally, apart from a bit of disturbed air, there's no downwash because those blades at that moment aren't really generating any lift whatsoever. So why, and the Cadbury, I'll just say, because I was looking at Grant, if you're a Cadbury pilot, now those rotor blades, they're not symmetrical. They're definitely more like a conventional wing, aren't they? When we look at the end of them, the bottom's relatively flat, but the top's got that classic curve to it, hasn't it? And so the Cadbury rotor blade, with the collective fully down, and we'll just say zero pitch for a minute on the main rotors, does generate some lift already.
Oh, that's symmetrical.
No, they're not symmetrical. Yes.
Is the answer
And
that-
James, when he's finished his lunch, he'll tell you he flies the Squirrel, which is just like a giant Cadbury. Same sort of thing with their blades. They've got the same kind of aerofoil, just lift generating section. So one of the, just on that note, I wonder why? Why is, for instance, Robinson got asymmetrical, but Cadbury haven't? So why has Robinson chosen for their blades with zero pitch not to generate lift, yet Cadbury have?
Is it anything to do with green head?
Because there's only two.
There's a little bit. Sorry, go on, Alec.
Is it because there's only two blades as opposed to three?
Not that I'm aware of, but there might be an element of truth in there.
Is it do with the rotor head?
Again, there's a tiny bit maybe to do with that, but it's all about, so Jock would probably understand this a lot more if I said it's all about the center of pressure. This is frozen. No, he hasn't frozen. That's cool. So what we don't want generally, certainly on something like the Robinson rotor blades, is the center of pressure, which is it's about a quarter to a third of the way back on normally on a wing, roughly speaking. That's where it kind of acts, all the force acts. You don't want that moving around. Now, for a lot of aeroplanes, that moves around quite a bit, doesn't it, Joe? Now, on a on a rotor blade that's quite long and narrow, if that center of pressure is uneven as it goes down the blade, it's going to cause the blade to distort. And that's not such a good thing. It alters a whole lot. Now, this might be leading on to more the teetering side of rotor blade systems, but it's more about the structure of it. So the Capri and things like the Squirrels and many other helis have the lift generator section because they can, the center pressure can move a bit and the blades are very, very rigid and strong, so they can cope with it. There won't be too much twist in the blade. So undue forces. So that's what I got told originally about, you know, the Robinson blade, why it was asymmetrical. So the center of pressure didn't shift around too much. I'm not going to keep going on about that side of things, but it was to alleviate forces. And it's another reason why things like the Robinson have got coning hinges down the end of the blades. Now, I don't want to go off down the aircraft general knowledge route, but it's just one of those interesting facts. So a lot of people do believe with the rotor spinning on the ground, the helicopter's already generating lift, and it pretty much isn't. And then other people believe that we actually control the RPM to generate the lift, you know, make the blades go faster and it goes up. Well, it might be in your radio controlled model, but generally speaking, no, that's not how we do it. We have a constant RPM. Okay. So
sorry, I was going to say, so is that you have to obviously increase the angle of attack on the blade,
yes,
and in order to do that, you use, I guess, is it the collective? It pushes the
Yes.
stator up. It changes the angle of the blades.
That's it. You got it.
Giving us-
Yeah. So suddenly whilst the blades are spinning around, we'll pull some pitch on a blade, which will increase the angle of attack. And we'll get that airflow has to go slightly further over the top compared to underneath, the low pressure above, higher pressure underneath. Hey, presto, it's got that kind of sucking motion up into the air. Brilliant. So therefore, as a helicopter pilot, so just testing everybody's knowledge, do we directly control the angle of attack with, say, the collective lever?
Yes.
Not you control the pitch angle, not the angle of attack.
So Ross has gone for no. You got yes, no, or don't know. Tony's gone for no.
Yeah, it's pitch angle, isn't it? Because the angle of
But
attack
does
would-
that control the angle of attack? Directly control the angle of
no,
attack?
not direct.
No. So this is a if you do come from fixed wing, you're very used to being able to control the angle of attack pretty directly, aren't you? You pull the nose up, you
Yeah.
increase the pitch on the angle of attack. It's just straight off. It's not like that for us. But why?
The relative airflow.
Yes, relative airflow. If I lose anybody, just shout, okay? So the relative airflow. What's the relative airflow?
The airflow in relation to actually the position of the aircraft.
Not the
Controlled by the
Wind,
RPM.
oncoming wind. So
The
yeah,
the
kind of,
wing.
Alex. The wing.
wing or the rotor.
Yes. So again, remember that when we fly the helicopter, are we really flying the bit we're sitting in?
No.
No, we're not really. We're
Right.
really flying the rotor blade, the rotor disc.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And those blades have been spinning round. If you take the Capri, 530 revolutions per minute, the tips are doing somewhere in about 400 or 500 mile an hour, roughly speaking, just around that sort of ballpark figure. But they've been slicing through a bit of air many, 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 many times. And it draws, especially in the hover, that air down from above. So, you know, to get my simple head around it back when I was learning to fly, my instructor said, imagine you were standing on the front of the rotor blade. Yeah, it's be impressive, isn't it? Hold on real tight. Anyway, just imagine you stand on the front of the rotor blade. Great. Rotor blade's spinning around. Yeah. The wind's hitting you in the face, isn't it? But at the moment, it's hitting you directly in the face, isn't it? Because we're on the ground and the lever's down, and you keep going around the same bit like this, and it's hitting you in the face. If you pull up on the collective, does the wind still hit you slap bang in the face? It's the thing. Yes. Leaning back. No, I'm leaning back, but the wind's hitting me under the chin. But what about the airflow that's being pulled down from above? Ah. So in other words, the wind isn't coming directly at me. It's coming from slightly above now. It's changed because the rotor's been pulling the airflow down for a period of time. And the longer chance they get to pull the air down, this airflow, this relative airflow or wind as we describe right now, comes from higher up. It changes. And when I can flick up some diagrams in a minute if you want. To calculate the angle of attack, you look at the pitch angle of the rotor and how this relative airflow is coming down comparative to it. And there is your angle of attack, that angle in the middle there. So like I said, in something like the hover with zero wind, the airflow above the helicopters had quite a chance to draw down towards it and accelerate towards it, which makes this angle of attack, correction, this relative airflow come higher up compared to where the collective lever is and the pitch on the rotor. So you're not getting a very good angle attack. But you move forward into cleaner air, suddenly it hasn't had so much of a chance to accelerate down to the rotors, and the relative airflow comes from lower down, and you've altered your angle attack just by moving forwards without having to touch the collective. So just in that very, very simple, quick, simple explanation, you can already see we can influence this relative airflow and angle attack, but we can't control it, not directly. Now we know about this when you learn to fly and you know how to start using it to your advantage. And this is how we see that in the hover, we need a lot of pitch, collective pitch, a lot of power, especially if we're heavy, because that airflow is rushing down through the rotors where it's been spinning around it many, many times. But we fly forwards into nice, clean, fresh air, and we can literally reduce the power demand, can't we? And fly without using as much power because we don't need as much pitch, because the relative airflow comes lower down and maintains the same angle of attack that's required for flow. Very easy. And once you get your head around that, you can start to apply that to the different stages of helicopter flight, from obviously being on the ground to off the ground to hovering, hover taxiing, transitioning, which is that going from a hover to the climbing, level flight, decelerate. Oh, you can apply it to all of it, can't you? You can start to think about this relative airflow, how it's going to strike the rotor blade versus the collective pitch angle, and how that angle attack is going to change. So what else alters the angle of attack? We've already just said the way we influence the relative airflow through the rotors. Or I ought to say, sorry, what influences the lift? A, the aerofoil shape section, whether it's already a lift generating one or not.
Air pressure.
The density, the outside, yeah, that's right. More dense air, they love that, don't they? The helicopters, they fly much better.
Temperature.
Temperature, yeah, absolutely. That kind of goes hand in hand with that sort of pressure / density, doesn't it? All of those go hand in hand. Generally speaking, the more dense the air, the better they work.
Airspeed. The incoming relative airflow's velocity.
Yeah, that's right. Potentially how fast you're already flying through the air, doesn't it? Will influence how much lift they generate, because it changes that relative airflow. And there's one other element missing here, one of the major ones.
What, induced it?
That's what. So Ross just said about induced airflow, but that's just that measurement of how much that airflow is coming down, what angle, which will determine the relative airflow. So if you need me to put a diagram, I'll stick one. I'll do that while we're chatting. So there's something missing.
Rotor RPM.
A rotor RPM. Good, that's the one. So rotor RPM, because lift is pretty much directly proportional to that as well.
Yeah.
So we've got to have this good old angle of attack. We've got to sort that one out whilst they're moving through the air, just like the wing of a plane. Oops, let's end Jonathan.
Well, who can remember the formula for the coefficient of lift?
That's easy. Okay, let me just quickly share my screen. God, they've moved it all around again. Oh, I have to say, I very embarrassingly once on a video, I got that formula wrong. Yeah.
Oh, right.
I missed something out, and I just thought, no. And I kind of just thought, I don't think anybody's noticed. I'll just keep going. Yeah, thankfully it wasn't it wasn't an element I was talking about within the lift formula. It's only when I looked it back after I thought, that's a load of rubbish. Whoops. Anyway, so that'll teach me not to try and, push my way through it sometimes. Hopefully you can all see this book. This is one it's actually the older version of it, but we use this one quite a bit. Can you see that, the way it says The Private Helicopter Pilot's Guide by Stephen Sparrow? Yeah.
Yes, we can see
So
that.
there's an updated version, and back when this first came out, this was one of the best books around, certainly if you were a Robinson R22 pilot, because it was literally written with the R22 in mind. So it was great. It's perfect. All the pictures all look like R22s, and the instruments and all the rest of it. So it's very, very good. But we can adapt it to the other helicopters relatively easy. Pooley's now own the rights to this because Stephen sadly passed away, but they sort of bought the rights to it, and they've, with a bit of help from me and some many other good people, we've tweaked it a little bit and just updated it. Anyway, within here, If I can quickly whiz through, whoops, don't want to go too fast. I'm going to get to a vector diagram. This book does talk you through many different things, including that very thing we've just been talking about, how that aerofoil section generates lift. It's going to be in the, come on. So it's got all the exercises in here, which is good, very, very helpful. But there is, where's the, I'm looking for a vector diagram. Don't want that one. Ah. Oh, there's, oh no, it's recycling there. Talk about that later, maybe. So this page will start to talk about the things we've just been discussing. And down in this bottom right-hand corner, you can see there's our, in this case, asymmetrical aerofoil section. There's the collective pitch. So the pitch line that we pulled up on the collective. The black one down there is the, if I can see it, plane of rotation, and then pulling the air down, so it's drawn in red. I'll vector diagram in a minute, and there's that angle of attack we were talking about, just in a very simple form. You know, it starts to become more complex as we go through the book, which is good. So, yes, RPM. So, RPM is just simply, I hope everyone knows, just the revolutions per minute of the thing you're measuring. In this case, the rotor disc, isn't it? Okay. So, how about the velocity of the wind going over the rotor blade? Does that change? Because the RPM, does the tip of the blade is doing the same as the root of the blade?
That is a variable if you're moving or not.
Yes, in a minute. Yeah, good. Excellent. But how about just simply along the length of the blade? So I mentioned the tip of our blades are typically doing somewhere around about 400 or 500 mile an hour, something like that, depending on. But the root doing nowhere near as much. Might be barely 50 mile an hour. So there's a huge difference there, isn't there? And if that lift is already directly proportional to RPM, that's fine, that's a constant. But what about the velocity of the wind going over it? Well, Jock there will happily tell you, you know, if you've only got about maybe 50 mile an hour wind over a wing, it might not generate enough lift to get the thing off the ground. But if you stick 500 mile an hour wind over it, well, it might not be able to cope with it, or could be generating huge amounts of lift. So we can see along the length of that rotor blade, if we're not careful, the tip of it will generate way more lift than the root, and the force bending that up is immense. Could be. So how did the designers get round this? It's a bit aircraft general knowledge, but it's worth knowing.
It's at the end of the blades.
But yeah, it's one of the work.
Centrifugal force.
Yeah.
Pull the blade back down again.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things like that. Yeah, and to try and reduce tip forces
Change
and
the design of the blade so it's not constant from the root to
twist.
the tip. Twist.
Yeah, so I mentioned it earlier. The Robinson's got about an 8-degree twist on it. So whilst the tip of the Robinson blade is pretty much 0 with the collective fully down, the root is twisted up by about 8 degrees. Now that's so that it tries to even out the amount of lift it generates when you pull up on the collective. So whilst the tip is traveling through the air a lot faster than the root, it's got less already built-in pitch, and the idea is that evens that out to try and reduce the forces going along the blade. Because you don't want, I'll show you a video in a minute of a horrifying video of a camera strapped to the root of a rotor blade whilst it's spinning around in flight, and how much the blade moves. Yeah, it's horrifying.
But does the cavalry have the twist as well?
Yes, it does also have twist in the blade. Yeah, just a small amount, but yes, it does as well to help, again, reduce the stress along the blade, even though it's already a lift-generating blade. But it's all, you then start to look at the makeup of the blades. The Cavalry blades are basically solid, whereas the Robinson blades are hollow, and the solid blades can sort of take a fair bit more punishment as a net result. Okay, so you start to, when we teach them, we start to get into vector diagrams, don't we? And for a lot of people, this might be the first time they've seen these sorts of diagrams showing direction of force. But that's okay, it's cool. As always, we can tailor the ground score on your knowledge to your ability to absorb it, isn't it? And how your depth of knowledge. It's great if you have a fantastic depth of knowledge. Of course it is, but we can only go so far, and we'll do the best we can with that. So don't, if you're beginning to learn to fly or thinking about it, don't be too worried about, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this before. That's fine. We just walk through it step by step. No big deal. And then the vector diagrams, yeah, they get a little bit more, you know, there's a few more lines on there, a few more arrows. I'm not going to go through the whole lot for the moment. Don't need to. We already hopefully got that basic knowledge of how that rotor blade generates lift, and which is good. And then it's going to be about how we're going to use that. But we do need to just understand a few more things that are going on with that rotor disc. So it's spinning round. Excellent. So we've got RPM. We're just going to say it's a constant for now. We've got the wind velocity over the blade. And we'll just look at the tip for a minute, just to simplify things. And we'll just say it's about 500 miles an hour, just roughly speaking. Excellent. So if we, with a sum, the lift formula, we could put pen to paper and calculate this and have a sum total of lift being generated. It would work.
In the hover, it's still there, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Like Carl said, in the hover, in still air. We've already mentioned as soon as you create an airflow across the rotor disc, the induced flow reduces, angle attack increases, generates more lift. But is that across the entire rotor disc? So what else is going on then? Because at the moment we really only described a helicopter in the hover. We haven't even talked about the tail rotor and all the rest of it yet. So what else? What else do we talk about when we start talking about principles of flight? Maybe if you want a bit of help, a helicopter that's going from forget the wind for a minute. It's just hovering, and it's going to start moving forwards through the air. What occurs?
Lift asymmetry.
Yes, so that's right. Dissymmetry of lift. Now, is dissymmetry of lift good or bad? Very bad. Yep. Jock may know have read about this already, but symmetry of lift, it'd be a bit like one wing generating loads of lift and your other wing not generating much lift, or even worse than that, a negative lift. The thing, I mean, you sometimes do that deliberately with things like ailerons, but the net result, it rolls, doesn't it? Well, so would our rotor disc, and it would do it violently as well if we had dissymmetry of lift. So that's a really bad thing. So we need to have symmetry of lift. We need to get rid of that one, don't we? So how do we achieve that? Do we do it?
The disc can flap to equality.
So the disc can flap, or the blades can flap to equality, but we can say the disc because it does eventually. Yeah, but it's looking at the individual blade, isn't it? So what do you mean, this flapping thing then, Ross?
Here we go. Now I've got to describe it. So the blades can, or the disc can kind of like dip down. I can't explain it very well, but it will dip down in one side to decrease the angle of attack.
It's in here somewhere. Yeah, go on. Hey, there we go.
So the angle of attack decreases on one side of the disc. It's flapping, say, down, for example.
Yes. Yeah. So what we have to get our heads round, I say, if everybody knows all this, but do shout, because we can just move on to something else. But it's always, from a teaching point of view, it's always good to go over the basics first, so you've got that kind of basic knowledge, because then we can build upon. Otherwise, we start talking about effects and principles and whatnot, and we get lost if we don't understand just the very basics behind that rotor blade, don't we?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So when we talk about flapping, imagine, I look stupid like this. Imagine these are rotor blades. They can go up and down. Now, some of them can go up completely independent of one another, or if it's a two-bladed system, it seesaws. But that's fine, because as one blade goes up, the other needs to go down, and vice versa. But if you take the Cabri, it's got 3 blades, and then more blades after that. They do it independently, comparative. They don't seesaw at all. So this whole flapping up and flapping down, well, whilst the blade is spinning around trying to generate some lift via that relative airflow that it can't control, if a blade flaps up and starts to move up in the air whilst it's spinning round, it changes, and the angle of attack increases or decreases.
Decreases.
It does. It decreases. And if it flaps down,
increasing.
Yeah, increases. So we know if a blade flaps up, it decreases potentially the amount of lift it's generating. And if it flaps down, it increases it. Now that in itself would cause dissymmetry of lift, wouldn't it? But what about if it was trying to resolve a problem? Maybe the blade is generating too much lift comparative to the other blade. Well, if it flaps up, it can reduce its ability to generate lift, can't it?
Mm.
And if the other blade that's suffering flaps down, it can increase its amount of lift, but not above the original value, but maybe to kind of like the same value. So the next thing, if you could measure it, although one blade's flapping up, the other's flapping down, the amount of lift they're being generated is equal again, and we get that symmetry of lift. Because what would happen to the helicopter, therefore, if that rotor disc did have dissymmetry of lift?
Roll.
It would roll. What, gently?
Horrible. I've never experienced it.
Well, theoretically, it'd be violent.
Oh.
Yeah, totally out of control, to the point where we'd probably just rip it off the helicopter or something like that. And it's a bit of a story, as always. Please do look it up if there's any truth in this. But my understanding was, back in the day, the race of creating the helicopter really between Sikorsky and the French, something like that. Anyway, sounds good. And I got told that it was Sikorsky that kind of come up with the idea that the blades needed to flap. So the original helicopter designs had very, very rigid rotors. And it's true, if you watch old footage and stuff, the blades are like, when they're stationary, they're just as stiff as they possibly could because they thought they needed to be. So they spin them round. They've got collective pitch worked out. Add that. It goes up and down. Terrific. And I got told that it was Sikorsky's helicopter that he discovered it. That when a gust of, he couldn't understand why. 1 minute it's fine, and either if they tried to move it or some wind blew across it, whoa, the thing goes violently out of control. And he discovered that because if we allow the blades to flap up and down and sort themselves out, they can flap to equality. And he supposedly, we're told, he was the one that discovered this whole flapping malarkey with the blades and sorted the problem out. So that kind of put him ahead in the race with the helicopter. There we go.
Clever guy.
Yeah, well, that's it. There's lots of myth about all the various helicopter people, but there we go. That's what I got told. So I do believe it's true to say that every single helicopter, no matter how old or modern it is, those blades do need to flap up and down. They must do that. Okay, so we've got this net result of this is the disc does move, doesn't it? Either A, if the wind starts to blow over it, or B, you move the rotor disc through the air. And what do we call it? It's on the screen. No prizes. It's called flat back and flat forward. So if we begin to move forward, the disc flaps back, i.e. tries to pull the nose up, doesn't it? Nose pitches up. And if we decelerate, it tries to make the nose pitch down. I'm not going to go right away through flat back. There's a fair bit to sort of discuss and how it all happens, but we've got the general gist of it for the moment. Okay, so the next thing we would get into is the fact that what makes the front of the disc and what makes the back of the disc, or the left or the right?
Well, the airflow, which way the disc itself is moving.
Yeah, that's because I told you.
And I guess it's to do with, where the disc thinks the air is coming from would be then where the front and the back of it is.
Yeah. So that's how I would normally teach it, to start getting you to imagine the rotor disc. Otherwise, you might say, some people might say, oh, well, the front of the disc is at the front of the helicopter, the back's at the back. And that's true. Yeah, absolutely. But when it comes to actually flying, the rotor disc has no idea where the nose or the tail is, generally speaking, does it? It has no idea where left and right is. So whichever way that rotor disc is moving through the air flow, it thinks that is the front, because that's what gets hit by the airflow first, doesn't it? And it's quite handy as a helicopter pilot, especially when we're doing low speed maneuvers and things, to start thinking like that. What's the front? What's the back of the disc? It's all relative to the airflow passing over it. Okay. All right. Now, so there's many other things that go on with this rotor disc. We've got things like inflow roll. So we know we've got flat back, flat forward, inflow roll. Again, I don't want to go too much down the aircraft general knowledge, but there are some other effects to resolve issues, which is called Hooke's joint effect, etc., etc. So from all of this, the one thing we start to get the idea of is that there's certain things going on up there with that rotor disc that are beyond our control. And with a bit of luck and magic, it all works.
Helicopters are black magic.
It's black magic, yeah. It's all voodoo, really, how these things fly. And fairy dust. Yeah, so there's a heck of a lot going on up there. It's far more complex than it first meets the eye. And You know, when I came into flying a long time ago, I was not naive about this, but it's like, oh my God, I didn't realize there's quite so much happening up there. Just when we just look at the rotor blade and the rotor disc in the various stages of flight, wow, there's a lot going on. But slowly, get your head around it. And eventually when flying, you can almost imagine it happen. Each part of the flight, you can almost visualize what's occurring, and it puts you ahead of what's happening, which is good because that's how we need to be when we fly, don't we? We need to be ahead of the aircraft, without a shadow of a doubt. Okay, so there's inflow roll. Let's talk about this thing here. Translational lift, or translating tendency it's sometimes called, but translational lift we call it in the UK. What's that one all about?
When you're talking to like an attractive lady in a different language, and she laughs at your joke, that's a translational lift.
Yeah, fair enough. Right, helicopters.
Sorry. You get to a point to the disc.
By the way, Carl, this does go out sometimes on the internet, so your partner might not want to hear.
Very good.
That was a joke. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, the disc, the airflow over the disc reaches a point where the induced flow reaches a point where it is allowing us to have a better angle of attack without having to produce so much pitch.
That's right. It describes if we move the disc through the air, it will generate greater lift for the same pitch angle, which means potentially we can use less collective pitch, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Good. And the whole sort of translational part is how, for instance, this occurs when we go from the hover, okay, we'll forget wind for a minute, to forward flight. So translation lift, does it only happen at a certain stage or of flight? Is it happening all the time or only occasionally?
Happening
All the time.
All the time. Good. Alex is brave.
Maybe the wind speed's faster might help. No? No.
So from when you read this section and look at translational lift, you'll discover, yes, it increases every time you increase your airflow over the rotor disc, it increases and the benefit increases. However, there's some other things that unfortunately can balance it out and take away what appear to be that benefit. So if we just say, once again, zero wind, rotor, you're hovering in a helicopter, absolutely dead stationary off the ground. And if you could measure your translational lift, you could argue that it's zero at the moment because you've got no forward movement. If you move forward at 1 knot, it's there. It might not be very measurable, but it's definitely there. 2 knots, 3 knots, 4 knots, 5 knots, it's all, you could measure it. 6 knots, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Some magic happens.
Significantly, yeah. The vector of relative airflow starts to become much more, it kicks in much more, and therefore you get enough of you just notice it, I guess, because it's exponentially sort of increasing on a curve.
Yeah, there's a sudden real change at around about 12 knots, roughly speaking, of airflow over the rotor disc. We usually describe it as effective translational lift. But translational lift is always increasing, but it's really noticeable at that moment.
Is a point of highest efficiency, does it?
Well, there's once again there's a bit of weird stuff goes on up in that rotor disc and a bit of black magic and all the rest of it, without a shadow of a doubt. But so as you know, Grant's an experienced pilot, what do you feel as you start to accelerate through about 12 knots? What do you feel in the aircraft?
Lift.
You do something else. It is actually more pronounced, to be fair, in the Robinsons. It shakes and shudders a bit.
Well, I don't get that in a camera.
Yes, you do. You're just not attuned to it. Yes, it does. Yeah, James flies the twin squirrels. It will happen, but won't be quite as. Actually, I don't know. I don't know if James can hear us at the moment. James.
Depends how old the twin squirrel is.
Yeah, look, we're not talking about.
No, it shudders. It shudders.
Yeah. So as far as I'm aware, every helicopter I've ever flown, you can feel effective translational lift. About 12 knots of airflow. The physics are all the same, no matter how big or small the helicopter. And some shudder more than others, but the thing shudders.
Mm.
And you feel the extra lift that wants to go up suddenly, doesn't it? Effective translational lift. But don't forget, it's always increasing anyway. But it's very pronounced at that moment. And there's a good reason for it. It's because the airflow going down through the rotors, you can see in this diagram, if we're hovering, is literally straight down from above. And as we move forward, it starts to become more horizontal. And it's really noticeable at that moment. It's a sudden change from being more vertical to horizontal. And that relative airflow really changes.
Yeah.
But it's not uniform over the disc, and it doesn't happen all at once, which is why the thing begins to shudder a little bit. Because it's a little bit hit and miss as it passes over the disc. And then once you get to about 15 knots, you're well and truly into it. And there's kind of no more shuddering. You keep flying faster, the benefit increases, and so forth. Okay. And it's timed, and you can actually see this if you've got any water droplets on the windscreen. So when we're hovering with water on the screen, you can see the droplets going down the windscreen. And if you've got wool on the windscreen, it's hanging downwards. As you move forwards and just get towards this 12 knots, you can almost see it go, you can see it go up the windscreen like this. The airflow, the water droplets change direction. They jiggle around and start to go up the screen because you can see the airflow is now not going under the front of the helicopter anymore. It's starting to go out the back. And once you're through effective translation lift, the airflow passing down through the rotors sometimes barely goes more than, say, a foot down through the disc and straight out the back. Doesn't get a chance because you're constantly going to nice clean air. So it doesn't strike the top of the cabin or anything anymore. Okay. However, unfortunately, as we get faster and faster, this benefit, whilst it does increase, it becomes less noticeable, doesn't it? And we get to a certain airspeed whereby you're neither gaining any more. It's not getting any worse, sort of thing. It's not dropping off yet, but it's not getting any better, this effective translational lift or the translational lift. And coupled with the other aerodynamic forces, we've reached a certain airspeed, which is slightly different for each helicopter, but we label it, it's about 52 knots.
The
50
most
knots.
efficient speed, V.
V something, yeah. V.
Not V and E. V and E is never exceed, isn't it?
Yeah. VY.
VY.
Yeah. It describes the, depending on altitudes and various other factors, but it describes pretty much the airspeed where the rotors will generate the maximum amount of, or the best amount of lift for the given kind of power you're putting through them, etc., etc. So VY. What else is VY often known as?
Best rate of climb.
Potentially best rate of climb, because it's where you've got your maximum amount of spare power / lift to be able to generate. It's also known as, is it on the screen? No, it's not on the screen. Go on, James. I can see you itching to chip in. Go on.
It's your endurance speed.
It is endurance.
Oh, yeah.
So it will make your fuel last the longest if we're talking about powered flight. Brilliant. So therefore, is it also the range speed, i.e. the greatest distance, miles per gallon? Why not? It lasts the longest.
Physics.
Surely, you take a car, if you drive it effectively the VY, and we'll just say 50 odd mile an hour for a minute, 60 mile an hour, 50 mile an hour, it will potentially get the greatest distance. It'll get the best miles per gallon out of it. Why is that not the same in the helicopter?
Distance isn't the same.
Just isn't.
Say again?
It just isn't.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, let's move on. Because one of the things we're forgetting, of course, is to actually get the helicopter or an aircraft in the air, but helicopter in the air, you've got to spin the rotors around, and they take quite a lot of energy to turn them around. Take the Cadbury G2, Grant, on the ground, getting ready to get off the ground, level pedals, so you've kind of got zero pitch on the fenestrum, collective lever fully down, but at full RPM. How much percentage of engine power is it currently using?
About 30.
About 36.
36, yeah.
Yeah, about 36. Good. That's what I thought you said. It's just over a third of what you're allowed to use out of that engine just to turn the rotors.
But the fuel's more interesting, isn't it? Because I remember when I was sitting in the aircraft with, I think it was Q one time, and he said to me, and we were just at 5:30 warmed up, and he said, look at the fuel consumption, and he basically said, like, for another 10 litres an hour, you can go flying.
That's right.
And I think it was using 25 plus on the ground.
It will be.
Doing nothing.
Yeah, just turning the rotors.
Just
And
turning
that's
the
the bit we
rotors.
kind of forget. So therefore, off the ground, it's already still doing that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you were to fly slowly, you're still having to turn the rotors, which actually through the air is a lot of work because there's a lot of drag when you start talking the speeds the tips are going at. Now add some pitch to it as well, and there's even more drag. So it's got to work hard just to turn the rotors. And this is why it's not, you can't do the same analogy with a car about that range. So whilst 50 to 60 knots, so most helicopters, I could pick on James, he flies a heli that I don't fly. James, VY the Squirrel, allegedly.
It's 50. It's still 55. Almost every helicopter I've come across is, apart from the R22, which is 53.
Yeah.
But
So
everything else 55.
Physics are that pretty much every single helicopter, until you get into the very slippery ones with and special rotors and Christ knows what else, is going to be about 50 to 60 knots. Then the manufacturer sometimes tweaks it, like the Capri says 50 knots, but it might just be because it's a round number. It might not truly be that, but they're all around 50, 60 knots. 22, 52, 44, 55, Capri 50, Jet Ranger 52. Yeah, so you can see they're all around there because the physics are the same. It's the same stuff. These diagrams, it's all the same.
Yeah.
Don't know what helicopter. Anyway, sorry, I was banging on about range because it's really important to understand this bit. So the VY between 50 and 60 knots keeps you in the air the longest for the amount of fuel you got, and we're talking level flight. But to get the furthest miles per gallon, you do what? Faster, slower? Yes, but how much?
23.
Yes, again, it does change depending on the helicopter. And when you get into twin engines, it might change a little bit as well. And again, the more advanced, more newer helicopters, it's slightly different. But anyway, it's going to be somewhere around 80 to about 90 knots. So it is. There's probably a vector diagram we can look at in a minute, but it's over here when we start looking at indicated or true airspeed versus however you measure it power. That's the VY down here because it uses the least amount of power to fly, but the range is just about there, roughly speaking. It's a bit faster. Let's say somewhere around 80, 90 knots. Again, the different manufacturers will state different things depending on what they're trying to achieve. Okay, so that'll give you best miles per gallon, hence range, isn't it? After that, if you start to fly faster, the poor old power required curve, when we eventually look at the right one, goes up dramatically because
Form drag and induced drag.
yeah, the drag starts to go up exponentially, doesn't it? Parasitic drag, so just simply the drag on the fuselage goes up exponentially as well, doesn't it? So there's all these other drags that you've got to overcome with power. And when we talk about the engine, that takes fuel. So the faster you fly after that range speed, the more fuel it will use per mile. So hence less miles per gallon. Now, initially, when we go past, I'll see if I can get a better diagram in a minute. Initially, when we go past the 80 knots, say up to 90 or 90, a bit more than 90, the fuel consumption we see in the Cavalry doesn't go up significantly. It might be a litre an hour, 2 litres an hour. It's not vast amounts. But if you were allowed to, if you start pushing those speeds up, yeah, it goes up significantly, really significantly. So when you're on your navigational exercise, there's a trade-off. It depends what you want to achieve out of this, doesn't it? If you want to get there quickly, you might just choose to go flat out of whatever you're allowed to do and just to hell with the fuel burn. But if you're trying to do it in a more economical fashion, you might want to slow down and back to that range speed, for instance. Just depends. If you want to just pootle along and enjoy the scenery, you might slow down even more and just accept the fact that it's going to burn more miles per gallon. If you've only just about got enough fuel to get to the destination, you're literally flying that range speed as best as you can and turning as many things off so it's burning the least amount of fuel. Some helicopters possibly leaning mixtures and things, etc., etc. So it depends, doesn't it, what you want to achieve from it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any questions of that so far? Showing that makes sense to everybody. Okay, so far so good. So how do we we've been talking about the collective lever mostly on that rotor disc, making it kind of go up and down, but we have also been talking about going forwards now. And what about left and right? So how on earth does that work? Magic. Yeah. Again, I don't want to do too much
Fairy
aircraft.
dust.
But we use a cyclic,
Mhm.
roughly speaking, by magic. Whichever way you move your hand, that rotor disc seems to follow it. It's brilliant. No idea how it works, but it does. So we changed the pitch of each rotor blade separately and in a cycle, don't we? A 360-degree cycle. The cyclic makes the pitch of the rotor increase or decrease as it goes around that 360 degrees. And the rotor blade, because it's allowed to flap up and down, flies its new pathway in the sky. Compared to the next blade, the whole thing, potentially, if we move the cyclic forward, the whole disc tilts forwards. Easy peasy. Collective lever sucks the air down. I'm not really allowed to say that. Induces the airflow down, creates a total rotor thrust up above. We steer that around with the cyclic. So when we're in the classroom describing these vectors of force, it's great. You get your little model helicopter and you stick a pen out the top of it, perpendicular to the rotor blades, and you just tilt the disc around, tilt the pen around. Whichever way the pen points, that's where the helicopter kind of wants to fly. It's very crude, but it works well. And you can start to look at the vertical elements and lift and all sorts of things with it. Okay, so the cyclic, thankfully, we can fly it around. What about down the back end of the helicopter? What's down there? Right at the end. Yes. But there's also some fixed things there, isn't there? There's a vertical one, there's a end on the helicopter, vertical and horizontal stabilizer. So the tail rotor, we'll start with that. What's the tail rotor for?
Anti-torque.
It is. Yeah, it's an anti-torque device, stop us spinning round. We call it yawing. So it stops us from yawing in an unwanted fashion, doesn't it? Or allows it to happen.
Yep.
If we want to yaw in the direction of what we call torque reaction, so the opposite way to the rotor's turn. Hopefully everybody's happy with that. So depending on which helicopter you fly, depends on which way that fuselage wants to naturally yaw. Robinson's or anti-clockwise turning rotors, it will yaw off to the right. Cadbury's way off to the left because they're the opposite way around, aren't they? Tail rotor changing the pitch on the blades, different designs. Again, don't want to do too much aircraft general knowledge, but either way around, generally speaking, a bit like a main rotor disc with a collective lever set pedals, increases or decreases the pitch collectively on those blades, induces a flow down through it, blows it through there, creates lift on the other side, a vector of force. Hey presto, balances it out. Yeah? Happy with that so far?
Mhm.
Good. So we can control the yaw. I'll come back to that. So vertical and horizontal stabilizers. Everybody happy with what they look like? Okay. So why have we got those? We've got a cyclic that does the nose up, nose down pitch and can roll us. We've got a collective that can make us go up and down. We've got pedals that can yaw us. What do we need? What looks like a rudder and an elevator at the back, but they don't seem to move. Not on our helis anyway.
Static.
The airflow that's going around the airframe. The
Yeah.
airflow that's going around the airframe, no?
Yeah. What about it, Alex?
Well, it's the shape of the aircraft itself is almost like a wing, so it's going to create difference in pressure of air and
Yeah.
could cause its own effect to the airframe. So I guess that balances it out at the back.
Maybe. All right. I'm not going to say no to that because that'd be wrong of me to say that, but there is definitely there's a definite reason why they're back there. We haven't quite touched that yet. Tony said something.
Help with stability.
Come on, you can be look.
No, don't
You
be
can
that.
So what do you mean help with stability? I thought that's what the helisas is for, or your instructor.
Yeah, or me sitting in the back. Helps with the horizontal stabilizer is like an upside down wing.
It is.
So in forward flight, it's pushing the tail down to keep the helicopter straight and level, giving stability in forward flight.
So pulling the tail down is really passenger comfort, isn't it? More than anything else potentially, because you don't want your passengers all leaning down at 10-degree, 15-degree nose down attitude for the flight, because they're not going to like that. So it pulls the tail down, doesn't it? For one. But that's not it really probably its primary reason, is it? It's that stability bit. But I don't understand. What do you mean stability? Right, let me ask this in a different way. What would happen if we didn't have a horizontal stabilizer?
If we
Oh, sorry. Carry on. Right, so isn't the tail rotor less effective in lots of forward flight? So it needs that stabilizer to assist it.
I think you need to
No,
turn the
but-
camera to
but-
us.
So yeah, go to it's a tiny minute. So no, it's more the other way around, but we'll come back to that.
Is there a rule to keep the tail rotor at a lower?
We're talking about the horizontal one. We'll
Right.
come back to the vertical one in a second, but why is there that horizontal fin / wing that's upside down, which pulls the tail down? But why is that at the back there? What would happen if we didn't have it?
The fuselage would be quite tilted, and the sort of tail would be sort of creating all sorts of form drag. It would be trying to fly through the air.
Would it
Right,
be a
work
case that you
into it.
wouldn't have the stability of control because that tail acts as a moment, if you like, as the pivot point?
Yeah, that's right. So what would happen if you didn't have the vertical one in the yaw plane? We do have the tail rotor that controls yaw, but you wouldn't have the stability of it. So you'd want to yaw
Similar
around
thing,
all over
yeah.
the place. And if you don't have the horizontal one, the tail can do what it likes up and down. So most people have played darts to a degree. What happens if you throw a dart, but it doesn't have the flight on the back? It's all over the place, spins through the air and all sorts, and just slaps on the board or goes in backwards or whatever. Same with an arrow, more or less, although it doesn't have a weighted tip, but it's more or less the same thing. Yes, you don't have the tail dragging nicely behind the front. Well, if you don't have the tail of the helicopter, the tail being following nicely behind the front, and it goes wildly up and down, there's something spinning around up there, and it goes through the rotors.
Yeah.
So it's disaster. So we definitely need to have horizontal stabilizer. The vertical, and I'm not going to try and fly without one. I think it'd be quite a silly thing to do, a big bad experiment. The vertical stabilizer, a bit like that, a bit like a rudder, but it's fixed in our helis. I believe that we could lose that, and we would still be able to fly because we've got the tail rotor that directly controls that, but you wouldn't get the stability of that. You know, the tail just happily follows along quite nicely behind the front of the helicopter, doesn't it?
Plus, it's also a bit of a power saving device, isn't it?
Yes.
Once you get forward flight,
Good. Yes.
it takes over from the tail rotor
Yes.
fan and stabilizes the tail.
So it stabilizes us in the vertical one, stabilizes in yaw, but also depending on the helicopter, how it's been designed, it's either angled off or it's got it's not an asymmetrical, it's a lifting section. So like on the Cabri.
Everyone's really effective, isn't
Yeah,
it?
very
You can
effective.
come to a
Yes.
standstill without putting any pedals
Yep,
can't
and
you?
in forward flight, the vertical fin on the Cabri does all of the work of the fenestrum. So the fenestrum's got pretty much zero pitch on it. And to be fair, the Robinson vertical stabilizer and the Jet Ranger, all the rest of it, they all do pretty much the work of the tail rotor. Again, I don't want to fall down the rabbit hole of aircraft general knowledge, but there's a big difference between a conventional tail rotor like on a Robinson and a fenestrum that's on something like a Cabri. They're kind of like, they look similar in some, well, they don't look similar, but there's blades spinning round. You can change the pitch with the pedals, so that's identical. And they both generate a vector of force through them by sucking air through and blowing it the other way, etc., etc.
So the Robinson one linear, isn't it? But the Cabri one,
Yeah, so there's characteristics very much. So there's
But
a huge difference.
Cabri one non-linear.
It's
Why is it in relation to the Robinson one? Because, like you said, they are just a fan with blades.
They are just a fan with blades.
Is it maybe because of the pitch of the blades are designed? Must be. The pitch of the blades
the speed of the
are
blades,
designed.
the shape of the blades, and it's because they're sitting in a duct. You start adding all those. Have a Google it.
But
have a
I'm
good
sure
look.
he could have designed it to be linear, no?
No, it's as linear as there. That's
But
actually
as
not
linear as they
bad.
could get.
I do believe that's about as good as it gets.
Because it's in a ducted fan.
Yes, because of the design of it, the speed of the blades, the shape of the blades, etc., and how it's working. Yeah,
That's the best outcome.
that's
Yeah.
about as good as it gets. Yeah, I've heard there are some that are worse. So some of the earlier fenestrummed helicopters, it's an even more, it's a bigger dead spot. So yes, it's non-linear. Anyway, yeah, there's the advantages and disadvantages of having a tail rotor versus fenestrum, etc. And then I said, then yeah, and then there's other designs of no-tard helicopters, etc. But anyway, we're talking about how they fly. So yes, that vertical fin rush, you can see that it kind of does the work of the tail rotor in forward flight. So now then, just going back very briefly, the tail rotor I did sort of say it's actually not that dissimilar to a main rotor disc. We'll just say Robinson for a minute, so it's easy to picture, or the Jet Ranger. It's just that the tail rotor is mounted kind of on the end of a drive shaft here instead of that way, isn't it? But the tail rotor, it has collective pitch. We do it with pedals. And it collectively increases, decreases the pitch on the blades. It doesn't have a cyclic though. But if the tail rotor is like a main rotor disc, remember, just winding back a little bit, all the things we said about the main rotor disc, about how it generates lift,
Angle of attack and all the rest of it.
angle of attacks.
So it's
What about when he moves forward through the air? What does it get?
Efficiency differs depending on where the coming from.
Yep,
Direction of flight.
you got it.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yep, the tail rotor also suffers or has
Loss of effect.
can do, yes. So it gets effective translational lift, it gets flat back, it gets flat forward, it gets inflow roll, it gets all of those wonderful things. And even when we look further down the line, it effectively it goes into vortex ring as well. All that sort of jazz. So yeah, it's really similar, isn't it, to a main rotor disc? When we start to describe it like that. And this whole, if we talked about the main rotor disc and we looked at translational lift and effective translational lift at about 12 knots. And we all know as you begin to accelerate, heli shudders and wants to go up in the air suddenly, doesn't it, around that speed, especially when you're solo. Well, the tail rotor does it. Have you noticed that? Yeah, of course you have. Come on.
Is it more pronounced in the Robinsons?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because the Fenestrams don't get effective translation if they don't flap.
I've been a passenger.
So there's a big difference now. I'd say, without going down the aircraft general knowledge, there's a very big difference between the Fenestram, how it behaves, and the tail rotor, because the tail rotor is exposed into the airflow, whereas the Fenestram's not. It's tucked inside the fan. So Fenestrams don't get flat back, inflow roll, translational lift, or any of these sorts of things. There's an argument as to whether they can or can't go into vortex ring, and it depends on the design of the fin. But anyway. So when do we experience in the Robinsons effective translational lift on the tail rotor? What airspeed?
Well, it should be the same 12.
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, in truth, you don't feel it shudder the helicopter like the main rotor. Yes, it's suddenly yours. Yeah, we demonstrate this back in...
Because the airflow is across the face of the disc rather than...
Yes, just like a main rotor.
Yeah.
If I go grab one of the models and turn it on its side, suddenly the tail rotor is like a main rotor.
It's the same, isn't it? Yeah,
it's exactly the same. Yeah. It's got airflow going across it. It's just mounted 90 degrees the other way. So any of the force, therefore, of things like effective translational lift aren't vertically like a main rotor disc, it's horizontally. So suddenly it works better. And
I'm sure James remembers my very wobbly translational lifts.
Yeah.
And we're always rock solid from day one.
So as an instructor, exercise 13, which is transitions going from hover to forward flight and forward flight to the hover. Personally, it's one of the exercises I love because there's so much going on. There's so many principles of flight, etc. happening. You need to have a really good understanding of them to get ahead of the helicopter because it all happens quite quickly if you're not careful. And this yaw, I love demonstrating. It's great. It's so easy. We spent time, James, doing all of this and demonstrating with the students. So it's great. You can literally pick it apart and show each effect during a transition in almost in slow motion. It's great. And I do the yaw one. So once we've overcome the falling off the ground cushion, flat back, and translation lift to the main rotors, if we leave the pedals still and leave the collective still, surely we're not changing the torque reaction, so we shouldn't have to alter the pedals. But literally, as you get to 12 knots, Robinson will yaw off to the left as the tail rotor suddenly works better and creates more anti-torque. And it's true. Think about it. You sit there in the hover with your left pedal forwards, and as you start to move forwards, it's more or less the same. More or less the same. If you pull up the lever a tiny bit more left pedal, and suddenly, whoa, whole load of right pedal, just as you get going.
Whereas it's the opposite in the Cadbury because the vertical stabilizer takes over from the fender.
Yes, so
you really you let the right pedal out.
And when if you were to compare the Cadbury vertical stabilizer to the R22 stabilizer, it's much smaller, isn't the Robinson one, because the effective translational lift is doing some of the work through the tail rotor of the anti-torque in forward flight with less pedal input, so it doesn't need quite such a big vertical fin. Whereas Fenestrams don't get this benefit, so they have a much bigger lift generating vertical fin, so it's doing the work in forward flight. So it really is a big old wing back there, and stalls and all the rest of it. The vertical fins on the on the 22, 44 jet range, they do stall as well. It's just not as pronounced. It's very subtle, whereas the Cadbury one that can stall at sort of just sub 30 knots, and suddenly you find yourself putting a whole load of pedal in because the big old fin back there has stopped doing its job. It's very noticeable.
Better as well. Oh,
That's better. I like Cadbury somewhere. Okay. Yeah, so once again, the tail rotor, there's an awful lot more going on back there than you realize. It isn't just as simple as increasing, decreasing the pitch, and it creates, anti-torque and you're the helicopter. There's a lot more occurring when we talk about that tail rotor flaps. Yes, it does. And it flaps to equality. But, and I've got one on the wall back there, there's something a bit peculiar about how a tail rotor is, if you take a tail rotor, how it's mounted, that bolt that passes through the middle of it. Looks heavy, doesn't it? But light, ever so light.
So strong.
That.
Oh God.
Don't weigh much, does it?
Really light.
Yeah, it's very light. Incredible. Probably most of the weight's actually just in this hub here. So how it's mounted on the helicopter, there's the drive shaft, the tail drive shaft sort of comes through here, if you like. Then there's a bolt that passes through this, but it's at a bit of a funny angle. It's at 45 degrees through the tail rotor, not in line. And it's a teetering hinge at the end of the day because it allows the rotor, if you think of the tail rotor, it allows it to seesaw. It needs to because it's got a flap to equality, isn't it? But it's at 45 degrees. What do we call that and why?
Well, the hinge.
Yeah.
Delta 3 hinge.
Yeah, it's a delta 3 hinge. And what it does very, very, very quickly, as we don't want the tail rotor flapping too much because it could strike the tail boom. So it's mounted far enough away from the tail boom to help prevent that. But also, because the bolt's here at an angle, as it flaps, it increases or decreases the pitch on the blades and helps reduce the amount they flap. So the delta 3 hinge is there to try and reduce the amount the blade will flap up and down to help it from exceeding limits or striking tail booms, those sorts of things. Again, it's a bit more sort of aircraft general knowledge, but it's quite cool what goes on back there.
Well,
So we said that I've got a bit of an idea that main rotor disc, pitch, roll, yaw, and height, very loosely speaking, doesn't it? It does all that lot for us. Has no front or back. But generally, if you're flying forwards, we'll say that's the front and that's the back and that's the left and that's the right. If we're hovering, the front of the disc, well, it's whichever way it's striking, the air's striking it, whether it be the wind's blowing or you're moving it. Tail rotor to control the yawed helicopter. And there we are. There's all that three-dimensional control, isn't it? Then we can make it do all sorts of things, faster, slower, turns, climbs and descents, etc., etc. So, of course, when learning principles of flight and how to fly, in the early days, it's all about making it do the things you want it to do. The going forward, the backwards, the ups and downs, the lefts and rights. But it doesn't take long before we start to introduce the whole, the things it wants to do. And sometimes they're not very good things either. So if we think principles of flight, what could a helicopter do as far as flying is concerned that A, you might not have caused it, and B, is not good? Bad news stuff.
Low G mass bumping.
Yep, low G mass bumping. That's one of the things we definitely don't want it to do.
The vortex ring.
Vortex ring, good, yes. That's one of the ones. Any others for a minute?
Retreating blade stall.
Retreating blade stall, yes.
Negative G rollover.
Yep, low G pushovers. That'll lead to mass bumping and either sever the head or the tail boom, yeah.
So tail rotor effectiveness.
Yes, yeah, LTE, yeah. Loss of turret effectiveness. Any others?
There's dynamic rollover.
Very good, Sue. Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Dynamic rollover. And we could see if we start to really put a minds to, we'll probably come up with a few more. So yes, unfortunately, like a lot of things, there's always some negative stuff as well, some not so good things. And you know, in training, we really do need to know about these because they can be quite harmful, can't they? At the very least, might break something, and the very worst might break us. So of course, a lot of the training suddenly is all about understanding these things and preventing them from happening. And if we can't prevent them from happening, recognizing they are happening and making sure it doesn't get any worse, get ourselves back into a better state. So talk to me about vortex ring.
It needs three things to happen, doesn't it? It can only happen with three things.
Yep. And what are those three things?
The airspeed has to be less than 30 knots.
What
No,
does it have to be less than 30 knots?
I thought it did, but obviously not.
Page 37. Oh, go on. Yeah, keep going. Go on. So I'm trying to find something on the PowerPoint.
You need to have power applied as well.
Yeah.
And the rate of descent more than 300 feet per minute.
Yep.
I think that's it. The three things.
Yep, pretty good. Yeah, and so fun enough, we actually, exercise 18, we go and have a look at this. Now, weird enough, exercise 18 is usually called hover out of ground effect. Well, hover out of ground effect isn't vortex ring. It's just hovering not near the ground, typically speaking. So as far as an exercise is concerned, it's almost like we're going to kind of teach you how to hover away from the ground, but watch out because it can go into vortex ring. And we need to now recognize that, because that is definitely one of the things that can certainly happen if you try and just stop at high altitude. You know, it's quite a skill to be able to truly hold the helicopter dead still far away from the ground, because visually it's hard to tell if you're moving up, down, forwards or backwards. Yours quite easy to work out, but it's very difficult to determine those other things without the aid of instruments and some sensors and various other bits and pieces. So forget that part of this for a minute. That's hot air ground effect. Let's look at the vortex ring part. Okay, so Alex very kindly said, yep, three things drawn as a triangle down here quite often. The ingredients of vortex ring, and we don't actually really want them, to be honest. But again, if we understand what can cause it, the ingredients, we know what to look out for, don't we? So you said that the airspeed had to be below 30 knots. Well, yes, certainly for the altitudes we fly. It is possible if we start to entertain the ideas of flying at incredibly high altitudes in very, very thin air, the onset of this vortex ring can happen a lot earlier. But as a rule of thumb, definitely, yeah, the airspeed that's going over the aircraft, less than 30 knots. Sometimes we say indicated airspeed, but of course, if your airspeed indicator is not very accurate, that's not very true. So it's kind of, it's true airspeed, but however you're measuring it. So it's going to be a low airspeed. A rate of descent, it's often described as a high rate of descent, but it's not that high. It's only 300 feet per minute. It's not actually that fast at all. You think about normal descent you've been doing today, 500 feet per minute.
I should do some
600 feet, and that's twice as fast suddenly.
I did some maths in my head there, and I think you'd have to fall 20 feet in 4 seconds to, in my head. So 300 feet per minute.
It's not bad. Hang on, give me a second. Multiply by that. That's about 5 miles an hour. It's about 5 miles an hour downwards, roughly speaking. It's not fast at all, no. But once again, a bit like the airspeed, if we were to fly at 29 knots and descend at 350 feet per minute or 301 feet per minute with power applied, which means we're using the engine to turn the rotors, it doesn't mean so we're going to instantly go into vortex ring. And when we look at this as far as an exercise is concerned, it's not about waiting for it to get into fully developed plummeting into our death vortex ring. It's about understanding that this is the incipient stage, posh word for beginning. So we're always looking for the beginning of this, because if we see the beginning of it, we can nip it in the bud, then it never gets to develop. So we're interested in the incipient stage of vortex ring. And that is at low airspeed, descending using power. Any stage of flight where we have those three things could, if unchecked, lead to vortex ring. Okay. And then we would, you know, as far as the exercise is concerned, look at all different scenarios of that, how you could end up being in there, i.e. trying to hover at, you know, 2,000 foot above the ground is not a clever idea. But you do have a lot of, you know, space beneath you to get out of it. But it's just, for an untrained person, it's a recipe for going into vortex ring without a doubt. Okay, and then there's a bit of an image over here, describes, oops, where's my pointer gone? On the screen. Over here, visually, it looks a bit like a donut around the rotor disc, recirculating air going through. But don't forget, it happens all the way around the disc. It's not just two-dimensional, it's all the way around. And that donut gets bigger and starts to consume the middle as well. And anywhere that donut's consuming means you don't have really any lift or potential control over the rotor disc. So theoretically, if you had it completely, the rotor is completely enveloped in vortex ring, this would do nothing, and neither would the cyclic. Oh yeah. Theoretically, nothing occurs because it's all just the air's just so chewed up
So
there.
once you're into it, your options are fully developed. Your options to fly out of it are gone, basically.
Yes and no.
Oh, you can completely remove the power, can't you?
So you can remove the power. Good. So if you put the collective lever down, it instantly disappears like magic. It's brilliant. I've done it many times.
And then you can fly out.
The only problem is you need a lot of height for that.
Yeah.
And we discover as an exercise, this generally, potentially, because you're not going to go and do 2,000 foot or, you know, 1,000 foot hovers, this is more likely to occur on the stages of final approach. So you don't have a lot of height to play with. In other words, you can't go into auto rotation. It just isn't going to work. So would it instantly gets you out like that. It's worth remembering that for just in case one day in the future.
As long as you've got enough height.
As long as you've got
but
the
you
height.
don't need long. It's instant.
Oh, it's instant. Literally, you put the collective down, it's gone. Because you change the airflow, don't you? With the vortex ring, the airflow, you're still trying to induce the flow down from above. It goes around, back through the rotors. You put the collective lever down and fall, whoop, it's straight through.
As long as you've got a few hundred feet.
Instant.
You're good.
Yeah, it might take a few hundred foot. Because you put the collective down, by heck, you don't half suddenly drop. Yeah, very quickly. It'll want to go to kind of like terminal velocity of that helicopter at that moment. But it takes a few moments to be fair. But you can't just suddenly pull the collective up again because you go instantly back into it.
It's going to forward.
So you can now got control. You've got to put the nose down, which makes your rate descent go up even higher for a short period until you got some form, and then you can come out. So by now, you could have easily lost 500 foot or more. So if you're down at 200 foot, you can't do that. But it's a great way of getting out of vortex ring. So if it ever happened at high altitude, just put the collector down, nose down, you can fly away. Easy as pie. Very easy. Back into power flight again. Okay, so if it was truly, heavily, fully, completely developed and there's no control over your rotor disc anymore, so you can't do the conventional put the nose down to fly out of it, there's another technique. It's been around for a while. It's actually been around for a very long time, but it's lesser known. That's it. Vishard. It's some fantastic videos. Might play it in a minute if you like, 'cause it's quite cool to watch. Of this technique, and this technique uses the tail rotor to push you sideways. So when we start, we haven't actually talked about tail rotor drift, because the tail rotor on the helicopter is a little bit like a variable pitch propeller on a plane, and so it wants to kind of go in that direction, or whichever how it's mounted. So for us looking from the back, it wants to go off to the left. So we know that it pulls us, or pushes. Sorry, go off to the right. So it pushes us to the right. And it's not in vortex ring.
No.
So it works fine. So if we now use one of these principles of flight / effects of, one of the downsides of a tail rotor, suddenly to our advantage. See, normally tail rotor drift is a bit of a pain unless you deliberately want it to push you sideways because you want to fly sideways. Ever notice that? R22, 44, Jet Ranger, if you want to fly sideways to the right, does it quite easy because it wants to, because the tail rotor is pushing it that way, whereas it doesn't quite want to go to the left so easily. Cabri will be the other way around. Happily drifts off to the left, doesn't it? Whereas it takes a tiny bit more effort to make it go sideways to the right. So in this scenario, this fully blown vortex ring, if we use the tail rotor drift to push the helicopter sideways, because the tail rotor is not in that vortex stalled condition, it pushes you sideways out of it, and it works really well as long as you do the right thing.
So it's pushing you into the clean air.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what it does, we just take the Robinson for a minute. You basically you pull up on the collective and put pedal in just to keep the nose dead straight. You create quite a lot of that tail rotor drift, and it pushes you sideways. So the rotor disc for a brief moment thinks that's the front because it's going into lovely clean air. So it kind of side steps out of the vortex ring and allows you to kind of put the nose down, gain control, and accelerate and climb away. And you can actually recover really quickly doing this technique, and it's becoming more widely known. It's not necessarily on the syllabus as such yet, and you have to be a little bit careful that you don't stop it from doing its thing, because unfortunately as a helicopter pilot you tend to stop drift just instinctively. Maybe helicopter drifts, you tend to use a cyclic and stop it, but you mustn't. You've got to let it happen. So it's a great technique if your rotor disc gets completely fully vortex ring developed and you've got no control of your helicopter. Otherwise, for now, we do still stick to disc to the horizon and fly out of it. Robinson are sort of promoting V-Shard technique, aren't they? I'm guessing quite a few people have probably seen the video I'm talking about. Do you want to see it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, please.
Give me a few seconds then to find it. Video demo. It is that one, isn't it? Okay, with a bit of luck you can see I think it's the Matterhorn in the background, isn't it? You'll see that? Fantastic. Bit of dramatic music as well. I can't see the play button now. I'll try and touch the scale. There it is. You can see how long ago this was created. This was 2017. Richard. They've got, I think it's an Alouette. Spray bar on it, but to put smoke out of it so you can see all the airflow. This thing's yeah. So there it is, dropping into vortex ring. And now you can see it going sideways, and that's it. It's out of vortex ring already. That was it. Simple as that. No having to put the nose down or anything along those lines. So this is them dropping into vortex ring. There it goes. Look at that. Potential 20 to 50 foot is all you lose. It does depend on your rate of descent to begin with. Yeah. Yeah, it depends how quick you've caught it. So this is the really cool bit now where you see all the smoke. So there's your recirculating air. Imagine that all the way around. There's your donut. Look at that. Now it's really stalled. You can see the airflow reverses all sorts. And tail to drift. And there it is already. Look, cleaned the airflow. As quick as that. Look how quick it goes in real time. Look. So imagine unchecked how quick you drop. With special thanks and whatever else.
Paul, why is it opposite cyclic compared to the pedals?
Well, because let me just turn your volume back up a minute. If we think about, we'll just stick for Robinson for a minute, anti-clockwise turning rotors, the helicopter has a natural tendency in powered flight to, in the hover, to drift which way, Kyle? I'm looking at you because you've been flying it.
In the 22,
Mhm.
to drift to the right.
Good. So therefore, we want that to happen. We want it to drift to the right. So of course, when we lift the collective lever, so we lift the lever in a Robinson and we press normally the lift and left pedal, because we don't want it to yaw to the right, do we, for instance? So we use the left pedal. But it now wants to drift to the right. So they're saying left pedal and right cyclic. So if you do have any control over the cyclic, you're also encouraging it to go sideways in the right direction.
So you're keeping it steady on the yaw.
You keep it steady on the yaw, and you encourage the drift of the tower to drift. That's so if there's any control,
increasing the drift.
Yeah. So they're
left in the cab.
Fantastic. There we go. So it's right pedal. So you use the power pedal and then the opposite cyclic. So it's easy to remember.
You're only using the power pedal to keep the
but you're actually to create the drift. But yes, just to keep the nose straight. Yeah, you don't want it to yaw round. So you just apply.
So are you putting power in to increase?
Because you increase the power, so you increase the pedal.
Yeah, but are you doing that to increase the power on the fan as well? Yeah,
yes, that's right. So you're increasing that tail rotor drift.
So you're using all your maximum power.
Yep.
To
get the greatest amount of tail rotor drift.
You've got to put your power pedal in.
And you would also help it with the cyclic in case that does something.
In that video, they seem to be correcting that cyclic movement quite quickly.
Soon after, as soon as you come out, because otherwise it will roll over.
Fine.
You're only encouraging it to go in the right direction.
The minute you feel it starting to stop dropping.
Okay, so
it's like when you're in the hover, the Robinson is left skid low because you're correcting it.
Correct, yes. So we're saying now don't do that.
So
don't correct it. No.
Everything might say.
No, you did notice at the beginning, it did say about, that you need specialist training for this. You do, because I've experimented this a lot and with and without sort of students, as it were. So I do show them, and it is a really good technique if you execute it correctly. If you don't do it properly, you hold yourself in vortex ring. So if you accidentally, if you imagine lift lever in the Robbo, left pedal, we would instinctively probably start putting left cyclic in. That holds you in the vortex ring. You've got to allow it to drift or encourage it to drift away.
Yeah.
And in that moment when it's all going wrong, this is why you have to repeat it and drill it into you. Otherwise you'll want to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So it is a really good technique, but it does need a bit of training.
Counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive, yes.
You have to kind of like be really aware of the incipient stages.
Yeah, this is yes, and to be honest, this is a good technique if it's, like I say, if your helicopter becomes uncontrollable with the cyclic, VCHAR's about the only thing that's going to get you out of this, unless you've got height where you can just drop the collective. So it's very good in that sense. So okay, it's not quite mainstream training yet, but I certainly show it as just to look. This does actually work really well, but you do need to know what you're doing with it and not sort of. So I tend to find when students have a go, they don't, for whatever reason, they don't realise. Just just hold it steady with the pedals. So as you lift the lever, just hold it steady. They all seem to let it start to yaw around. Like, no, stop the yaw. You don't. Oh, I thought we wanted to yaw. No, we don't want to yaw. Oh, but you said we're using the turret. Yes, we are, but we want to drift. We don't want to yaw. Oh, and by now, we're coming down at 4,000 feet per minute. I'm thinking, hurry up. And then, of course, if it drifts, they suddenly put the wrong cyclic input in. It's like, no, let it drift. Oh, I didn't realize. And I've had, experienced quite a lot of this. Yeah, with when you let somebody have a go, if you haven't had it properly trained. So it does like all of these things. So for now, we do stick to the conventional look ahead, make the rotor disc touch the horizon, if you've got control over it, of course. Give it a couple of seconds, positive airspeed, or your airspeed comes alive. Then you can ease back and add the power and fly out of it. Because that will work for literally every helicopter as long as you've got control over the rotor disc. So we don't have to say, in this heli it's right pedal. No, this one is left pedal. It's just disc to the horizon. Couple of seconds, positive airspeed, we have to go. But this is another one of those principles of flight and then /air exercise that's all about recognizing it's going to happen. Therefore, don't let it happen. So it's really important we understand the principles of how it occurs and how the density, altitude, and weights of helicopters and all these sorts of things can have the earlier onset of it. Good. Okay. So what else did we say? Principles of flight that aren't so good. Vortex ring, definitely one of the big ones. Sue, ground resonance. Sorry, dynamic rollover. Yeah. Yeah. So, Sue, you can have the hot seat for a minute. Get that around. Hey. Sue, what is, because we don't want it, but what is dynamic rollover?
That's where the centre of gravity of the helicopter shifts and it will roll.
Yeah, not bad.
And
Yeah.
you're on the ground or you're touching down.
Yeah, so the skids need to have contact with the ground for it to actually occur. And it's generally light contact with the ground. So remember, this is, and it happens dynamically. So what does that mean? Rather than kind of like statically, what's the whole dynamic bit about it?
Yeah.
It does. It doesn't just simply happen fast, but it can actually get worse quicker as it occurs.
Yeah.
So it gets worse as it goes. It's one of these horrible ones that once it starts, if you're not careful, it accelerates in what it's doing.
Well, like
it's
put
quicker,
a marble
quicker.
on top of a football and it will just keep going faster and faster.
Yes, that's right. It's dynamically unstable like that. Good. So yes, it gets quicker, quicker. So we do the hey, who remembers that's it. Yes, so any flight whereby your skids, and in particular one skid, is in light contact with the ground. So typically trying to get off the ground, trying to get on the ground, maybe doing something like a running takeoff, anything along those lines. Or even if you don't intend to land, what about if you're hovering low, sideways, catch a skid? Now, if we were, and I'm not suggesting we should, but if we were to, not one of my helicopters, but if we go down to a helicopter, belongs to somebody else ideally, and we all go and try and push it over, how far do you think we'd have to push it before it falls over by itself?
Till the whole centre of gravity of the airframe is over the edge of the skid,
Yeah.
which is a lot.
Which is possibly 45 degrees, I should think, just as a ballpark, isn't it? Some more, some less, depends on how wide the skids are and all these sorts of things. So please don't go and try this. Anyway, but you can do it in a little model and it works fine. But how far do you think it might need to roll over with the collective lever up or with light contact with the ground before it becomes a big problem?
30 degrees in my head. I don't know where I got that from.
Not as far as it would, much less of an angle, because you've got the thrust and then the increasing thrust as you keep going.
So go on, we've got some offers here. We've got 30, we've got 15, 20. Any others? Anybody online want to have a go? So we don't want it to happen, but this is another one of those we need to understand it and not be frightened of it.
Like landing limits of 7 degrees.
What do you reckon? James, what do you reckon? Come on. You've been teaching this stuff.
I was thinking about that question. It's such a tiny amount, but the problem is because the pivot point, it's not really about that, is it? As soon as it touches, you're already out.
Yeah. So theoretically, if you, and it doesn't need, not that we want it, but it does need the skid, for instance, to be stuck. So it's got, like James said, a pivot point. So if there was a significant pivot point, I don't know, maybe let's just say your skid is butted up against a little ridge along the helipad, for instance, and you're trying to get off the ground, and you slid over to it, and it's there. It's well and truly stuck on this ridge. It's not hopping over, it's not sliding or anything like that. It's stuck. Theoretically, when you look at it, potentially,
No, doesn't need it.
literally next to nothing. In fact, if it's in the direction of tail rotor drift, the tail rotor is pushing you as well.
Yeah,
in that
in
direction.
in fact, be negative.
And it does. Yeah, the tail rotor actually makes it worse one way compared to the other. So the angle potentially, if you were light enough, potentially could be nothing at all.
0 or negative.
Yeah, that's right, because the tail rotor will do all the pushing. And then as soon as the disc rolls even slightly in that direction, it creates a side vector that's also now pulling in that direction. So you've got the tail rotor pushing you, and you've got that vector of lateral thrust pulling you that way from the disc. So you're right, it's nothing. The lighter you are, and the more kind of stuck, if you like, the skid is, yeah, the more susceptible we are, without a doubt. And that kind of makes you start to think then. So you realise that depending on which way your rotor's turn, depends on which way that helicopter is. It's just one of the factors. Is more susceptible to dynamic roll. So if you're in the Robinson or the Jet Ranger, we said it drifts to the right, so it's more susceptible to dynamic roll over to the right. There are other things that influence this, of course there is, but yes, it's more likely, one could argue, to roll to the right than it is to the left. Okay, so we don't want that to happen. So this is a bit like vortex ring. The early recognition of it occurring helps tremendously if we were talking getting off the ground. And if we're trying to get it on the ground and land it, we don't want to be going sideways, do we? Or backwards, because it can kind of dynamically roll backwards. And potentially, theoretically, it can dynamically roll forwards as well. But the skids, and if you've got wheels, are designed to go that way. So it's a bit happy to slide that direction, isn't it? And in fact, you know, some of the landings we do are actually running landings, aren't they? So we deliberately land a bit like an aeroplane because we now take advantage of translational lift. So we start to simulate what if the helicopter hasn't got enough power to hover. That's fine, we just land like a plane, running landings. Okay, so dynamic rollover, yes.
So how do you get out of it?
Well, it depends what stage you're in. So if we're talking you're trying to get it off the ground and it starts to roll, don't carry on with getting off the ground. Put the lever down, yes. Because remember, it's not just simply the tail rotor that's pushing you, which is quite a strong force. It's the disc where it tilts, it starts to pull you in that direction because of, imagine an arrow coming out the top, that's connected to your collective lever. You put the lever down, the arrow disappears. And if the arrow disappears, it's not pulling you. And if you put the lever down, chances are you'll use the pedals and put 0 pitch on the tail rotor. That's also not pushing you. Ka-chunk, and it settles back down. And not to scare anybody that's thinking about learning to fly helis, this happens all the time, as in it begins, but we spot that. You know, Kyle, that was happening to you earlier when I sent you solo.
Yeah.
Don't worry, it happens to everybody. So Kyle was, I hope he doesn't mind me picking on him, but it's a good example. He's well aware of this. We've been trained to the nth degree. So he was lifting earlier, I'm watching, and I'm outside the helicopter, so there's not an awful lot I can do about this. And he's starting to lift by himself, and it starts to roll to the right, i.e. the direction of the tail rotor is pushing you. And rather than carrying on, you put the lever down, readjusted, tried again. Happy days, off you go.
Can I just say I feel a bit sick now?
Yeah, I tend not to tell Captain about this until afterwards. Yeah, you want to be standing in front of it, watching it there. Your entire faith is on that pilot, you know. Yeah, of course, but this is what we train for, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. And this happens almost every single time we lift, especially if we're on the grass or something along those lines. Yeah, if we're on a slippery surface, it just slides. Yes, don't worry, Kyle did that as well. We're sliding off across the helipad somewhere. He's apologising, and I'm thinking, well, just put the cyclic in and stop it.
Yeah, stop doing it then.
So now almost like the opposite of V-chart technique, isn't it? The tail rotor's pushing us, but I'm saying, no, don't let it happen. You've got to use the cyclic to stop it, whereas V-chart, you'd encourage it.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, this happens all the time. So slippery surfaces, we're less likely to dynamically roll over because it can't grip the skid and create a pivot point. So often it's considered that a slippery helipad is safer because you can just slide around. Well, that's great as long as you stop it sliding and don't hit something else.
Yeah.
Whereas the grass holds us and doesn't slide, but is much easier to roll on. Then you go down the whole sticky muds and snows. Poor old James has been all over the country, especially up north. I should think he's been in all of those. There is sticky muds, and you have to do a bit of seething to try and make
I
sure.
landed on a mountain once, it was covered in ice, and it slid a bit, and that was very scary.
And then freezes and gets stuck.
Didn't get that bad, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've been there. You literally you're trying to get off the ground and think, I feel like it ought to be off the ground by now. And you kind of like put a bit of pedal in. The thing doesn't move. Yeah, you have to do the seething. You have to kind of move it to break the suction. Mud's quite bad. Yeah, you can get sucked into mud. You see, it's funny, isn't it? Because
Paul taught me that in 0 into the mud.
when
Really? I took a load of mud on.
yeah, oh yeah, it got filthy. When we all think, surely it's got enough power just to pull straight out of this. Yes, it has. But when you're in that finite moment of coming off the ground, as far as the helicopter's concerned, it only weighs maybe a kilo. Doesn't weigh much at all. It's very easy to maneuver. So therefore, if one skid gets stuck and the other one doesn't, and there's a heck of a lot of force and all the rest of it, it doesn't actually weigh that much now. Kind of apparently, you know, you could literally think of it. A helicopter hovering, you could just sort of put your hand under the skid and go, "Hey, look, I'm holding it." Doesn't it barely weigh anything? Yeah, push it. You can push them. Anyway, yes. So if one skid is stuck, that is not good because that creates one heck of a pivot moment. Yeah. So there's all sorts of techniques and various things. So
And you can be on the ground, not even in the mud, having that.
That's right. So getting off the ground, you put the lever down. If you're trying to get onto the ground and it starts to move sideways, you don't touch down, you go back up. If you are unfortunate, you're landing and it starts to move sideways and you contact the ground, you put the lever down. Because once the ground's contacted, you can't get off the ground. You'll just pull it straight over. So you put the lever down to get weight and gravity to hopefully hold you back down, etc., etc. Okay, yes. So dynamo. So what about ground resonance? How are we doing on time? What's ground resonance? Who wants to have another go? Sue's turn again.
It's
all right.
I think it's the mismatch of vibration. The helicopter on the ground and it's
bad.
Vibrating.
Yeah.
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 Which the Robinsons, or certainly 22, don't do.
That's right. Neither does the Jet Ranger. Yes. So therefore, any T2 two-bladed rotor system doesn't get ground resonance. Not to be confused if a helicopter vibrates on the ground and shakes a little bit. That's just an imbalance in the head because maybe got the cyclic displaced in the wrong position, sort of thing. Whereas the cavalry doesn't do that. If you move as well, it does move the cyclic a lot, but. So this ground resonance thing is not that. It's not the shake. It's not necessarily just the vibration or shaking of the helicopter. It's a rhythmic, kind of almost like a often experience. It feels like it's doing this a bit of a Dutch roll sometimes when it develops.
What you can't see is Paul's doing a belly dance.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. It sort of does this. Woo.
Describing James's squirrel.
Yes. So the good news, if you're in a two-bladed rotor system, no ground resonance. It's theoretically impossible. You can shake and it can rattle and do all sorts of things, but it doesn't get ground resonance. And this resonance is, like Tony says, an imbalance between, or a mismatch of vibrations between the
rotor-head and undercarriage.
Hey, that's it. So three-bladed or more rotor heads, so fully articulated rotor heads. Yep, it's got to be that. And something about the undercarriage makes it more susceptible. Wheels, because
someone else needs to answer that.
So why are wheels maybe more susceptible than skids or something else? Depends a bit.
So much contact. It's more condensed in one little area, as opposed to skids.
Not quite.
Because pneumatic wheels can kind of like bounce. Yeah.
It's what, sorry?
With the elo pressures. Elos?
Yeah. It's simply any undercarriage that allows the aircraft to move on it. The softer it is, the more it can wobble around, and it's that wobbling, that resonance that's the problem.
Yeah.
So if you've got a fully articulated rotor head, but you've got rigid skids, it's far less likely to get the ground resonance. It can still occur, but it's less likely. Whereas it's got very soft suspension, so
So you're already on jelly.
wheels, oleos, etc. Yeah, it can allow it to move around. And they talk about if your tire pressures aren't correct, because of course, same thing. Yeah, that's it. Can have that sort of wobbly effect, and it's a harmonization of the vibrations.
Yeah.
We don't want that.
Is
That's
it-
bad news.
Is it like having a caravan behind your car that doesn't have a stiffener?
Stabilizer bar. Oh, yeah, actually, a little bit. Yeah, it gets worse.
It's allowing an oscillation.
Yes, it
not
allows it
gapping.
to. Yes, and it develops and grows. It harmonizes, amplifies, undamped phugoid effects. All these sorts of wonderful terms. Yes. So therefore, the Cadbury, we have to be a bit careful. It's fully articulated, and there's a bit of give in the skids, so it can develop. Whether it develop into full blown. So ground resonance left unchecked, what can happen?
It'll
Shake
shake
it
itself
to
to
bits.
pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Literally to pieces.
Literally.
Yeah.
What? Quickly, slowly? Yeah. I mean, I'm running out of time, so I could show you YouTube videos on this. I'm watching. Yeah, the Chinook is just. Now it doesn't do it actually very quickly, but my God, the destructive power. I mean, eventually the gearboxes come out of the helicopter. It's incredible. And there's just a smoking mess left, isn't there?
Yeah, they're fascinating.
There's one of a
Is it Schweitzer?
Schweitzer.
Yeah.
My God,
Yeah,
that goes
100,
quick, doesn't
yeah,
it?
just shakes it.
Rattles it,
The noise it makes.
shakes itself to pieces, doesn't it? Unfortunately, James, there's a video you've probably seen in the video of the squirrel that gets the air ground resonance and thrashes itself.
Yeah, the air ambulance.
The cockpit falls off, doesn't it?
Falls
Yeah,
off.
the cockpit collapses. Yeah, the destructive force of ground resonance is impressive.
Yeah.
So again, don't let it happen. So ground resonance for you, multi-bladed or fully articulated pilots. If it begins to happen, what do we do?
Take off.
If we can get off the ground,
Because
because you lose the contact, so you don't get now the fuselage vibration.
Or is to adjust the power.
Yeah, so disc attitude is a bit of a Cadbury thing,
Yeah.
in that can actually help to just kind of reduce it or not let it happen in the first place, but they won't necessarily entirely stop it if it wants to really properly develop. It's RPM.
Yeah, check it out.
Yeah, because it's all about harmonies of vibrations, isn't it? Frequencies of vibrations. You don't want them to harmonize. Think of a chorus, a quartet of people singing. They want their voices to harmonize, don't they? Because it amplifies the sounds good and all the rest of it. Well, in aircraft, you generally don't want that to happen. You want it to be way out of tune almost, so that it doesn't amplify.
So you
So you
reduce
change the RPM, yeah,
Mm.
by closing the throttle. Yeah, because theoretically you can't open it anymore if it's at full RPM. Well, you could,
Yeah.
but you now wreck everything.
Yeah.
So you just
What's to happen for RPM?
no, it's weird, isn't it? Yeah,
I find it. I think my pad at home isn't perfectly level anymore. I've had a bit of sinkage, so I tend to find it happens, especially when I'm doing my checks at
So-
2000.
yes,
I just-
that's right. It happens around about there.
Adjust it very
Literally
slightly.
the RPM where we do power checks in
Yeah.
on the ground in the Cadbury.
Yeah, and I think unless your pad's perfectly flat, mine isn't. I think.
What about in the Robinson, the yellow band on the engine?
No, that's slightly different. Yeah, that's tail rotor
It's-
resonance.
yeah,
Yes, that's
tail
tail rotor, tail boom. Sorry, tail rotor drive shaft resonance. Yes, so it's another, but it's
Another
not ground
form of
resonance. But yeah, that's right. Let's see. You don't want to harmonize. Yeah, so this ground resonance. Simple as that. Two bladed, you haven't got to worry about it. Three bladed more, yes. Fully articulated, it can happen. Some aircraft far more susceptible. I've been in a Gazelle when it happens. This is before I learned to fly, so I didn't realise what was going on. But my God, it did not shake, and quickly we went from about to sort of lift off from a tiny little kind of like wiggle. The next thing you know, the thing was thrashing around, and boom, pilots dumped the lever and sort of slowed it all down. And I'm kind of, oh, he doesn't seem that bothered. Must be quite normal. Whoa! And then he lifted off and was fine after that. But yeah, I mean, it really did go. But they are very sprung, very springy on their skids, very very springy. And I said, I've back in the early days of having a Cadbury, this started to occur. So there's things that will influence it, how cold the rubbers are, the elastomerics, etc., up on the rotor head. how warm some of the drag links are, and all these sorts of things. There's various things. Whether the ground's level or it's got a slight slope, depends which way the slope is, can actually help improve it. There's many things that occur. So anyway, in the early days of the Cadbury, it never did it when I first got Echo Hotel, and it was relatively warm weather. But come the winter time, it started to do it. I'm like, what the hell's going on, you know? So I created videos and showed Gimbal about it and all the rest of it. So it's literally at 2000 RPM. So very carefully, I let it develop as much as it would go at 2000 RPM, and it got a fair bit on, but it's very easy to stop it and sort it out. I wanted to show them.
Yeah, that's generally where I find it
Yeah.
happens when doing your ignition checks.
Yeah, but we find in the Cadbury, but usually only first flight of the day. The rest of the day it's okay because the rubber's a little bit softer.
Adjust it by a small,
that's right.
very small.
You learn to
degree,
just
and
do
then
the
it
power
goes.
check at a different RPM. You say the cyclic positioning can help prevent it from occurring, but once it's started, you can't stop it with the cyclic. So you can help prevent it from beginning. You can't stop it with using the cyclic. So it's really important we know it's get off the ground or close the throttle. Simple as that. Cool. So, any questions for a moment about anything before we sort of sign off? Yes, there are loads more principles of flight, and we haven't gone heavily in depth into all of them. Hopefully, it's given you a bit of extra knowledge, whether it be simplified it or been a little bit more in depth. But it's really, I think we all know it's really important that we understand the principles of flight, because it's how we actually make the things fly, but also how it sometimes doesn't want to fly. We need to make sure we keep an eye on those ones and don't let them develop. But as we discovered with the tail rotor drift, actually it can be quite helpful if you want to deliberately drift, whether it be a maneuver, normal maneuver, or something like V-chart technique. How can we use all these things to our advantage rather than them being disadvantages?
Yeah, terrible.
Yep.
Sideways transition.
Yep. The more we understand, the more kind of like hopefully forewarned, forearmed, but also, like I say, we're amazing what you can do with the helicopter. Think outside the box. Well, if nobody's got any questions.
Next time is Met, by the way.
Oh yeah, so meteorology next time, 4 weeks time.
11th Feb.
Oh, 11th of Feb. Okay. Hang on, I'll be preparing for Valentine's.
Yeah, I bet.
Takes about 3 days to get the preparations done. To think about what I'm going to do. Yeah, so Met, another favourite. I love Met because it's amazing and it really affects us. Take today with the weather. The forecast suggests that's it. We're not going to get much flying done. Well, actually, we managed to fly all day long, didn't we?
3.5 hours.
Yeah, it's good because we kept an eye on it, managed to forecast what's happening in our localities and read the weather a bit, and with a bit of luck, a bit more luck than judgment, we get it right. Cool. So anyway, yeah, join me for Met.
Thank you very much for everything.
Hey,
It's very informative.
Thanks, John. Hope some of that's helpful. Good to see you, James. See you again soon.
Thank you very much, and yes, I will see you very soon.
And as long as you get out of Exeter.
Yeah. Yeah, might still be in Exeter.
Yeah.
Hook me up at the Indigo Hotel.
Is that where you're at?
Yeah.
Hey, it looks all right from the camera, from what we can see.
Oh, it's very nice. Yeah, after the UK tour, it's 4-star or better, We're not having anything else.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You just happened to divert into Plastinas,
The amount of times, because we work in out of what's it called, Carnarvon.
Yeah.
And the amount of times I'm like, let's just go in there. Let's just go in there. It's never in budget, but I want to go in there.
Yeah. Yeah, it is nice there, isn't it?
Yeah, much nicer, much nicer. Best place on the UK tour, I think.
Very nice.
Okay.
Well, lovely to see you. We'll see you in person real soon.
Absolutely. Pleasure to see everyone.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, James.
Bye-bye. Thanks very much for everything.
Thank you very much.
That's all. Bye then.
Bye-bye.
Aye, thank you.
Yeah, that's right. James showed me a